Hi, my name is Adi. I'm your favourite armoured penguin, and you're listening to Catholic versus Atheist.
So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, if you would, please. Who you are, what you believe, and how you came to believe what you believe.
Okay, well, I didn't really believe anything. I've actually been raised an atheist. I've never really come into contact with any kind of religion or anything like that up until fairly recently, really. I was baptized as Church of England, and because of that, a lot of weddings and other christenings and such. I have been to church, but it's never really been anything for me more than just an impressive building. And I've never really understood any, all of the words that were being said. They were largely irrelevant and boring as far as I was concerned. There were always things that I would rather be doing than sitting in church, if you know what I mean. And I guess my first real experience of any kind of religious stories, I guess, would be in school, where they tried to teach me the story of creation. And that was it. It was never anything more than just a story to me. It was always just some people used to believe this sort of thing. It never occurred to me that there were actually people who genuinely believed it even today. Now, I haven't actually spoken to her in quite a few years, but one of my exes was a devout Catholic. And that's she would probably be the most devout person I knew. But as I say, I haven't spoken to her in a few years now, so...
So what do you believe? If you don't believe in the religious fairy tales, what do you believe?
I'd like to think that I don't believe anything. And when I do, I believe it based on evidence and rational thought. Or I feel there's absolutely no reason for me to think that there's any kind of guiding force in my life apart from my own. And it's kind of an act of pragmatism as much as anything else.
You did mention pragmatism sort of in an offhand way. It does bring to mind philosophy generally. Have you read a lot? Are you interested? Have you studied formally or just as a hobby?
I mean, it's not something that I've studied a massive amount. I have my own sort of philosophies, and generally I tend to live by, if you're nice to other people are nice to you, and that's generally, that would be generally my philosophy and how I would live my life. I try to be as honest as I possibly can whenever I'm talking to people, because I appreciate when they're honest back to me.
What do you think of the Hindu concept of karma? It sounds like something you'd be into.
It is, and actually, I've had a few moments that I've jokingly called instant karma happen to me over the last couple of days. You know, from living in the UK yourself, snow isn't exactly a common occurrence here, and when you live on the top of a hill and you've got idiots who don't know how to drive, then you see an awful lot of wrecks, an awful lot of people losing control, rolling cars, all sorts of things. It turns into a bit of a mess. And as I also mentioned over email, I've also had my car hit by such a driver who's lost control in the ice and the snow. And so at the moment, I have been given a 4x4 to sort of deal with the weather. But as I was coming home on Friday from work, a gentleman in a van, a white van driver, they have a tendency of tailgating. They have a tendency of overtaking on unsafe bends, and all, they've got a bit of a reputation, and it's a nationwide reputation too. And I had one such driver overtake me, and no sooner did he get in front of my car, and he lost control of it and ended up parking in the ditch on the side of the road. And I just pulled around him. It was just like, yeah, all right, instant karma.
Can you just tell the listeners a little bit about your experience with rally racing or whatever it is that you said that you do?
Oh yeah, of course. Basically, back in the 90s, when I was a teenager, I actually started off as a co-driver. So I was the one there writing down all the pace notes and reading them back out. 100 feet, right 6. 100 feet, right 4. That sort of thing. So that was my sort of introduction to it, and I moved on to actually racing them as well, which is great, because you can start doing that in the UK before you can pass your driver's test. As long as the road is closed and there are no public members on that road, then you're allowed to race on it at a younger age. So my first introduction to driving was driving high-powered vehicles on loose terrain competitively, and it was great fun, absolutely great fun. And I've been around the world now. Lived in various places around the world, and I've got back to the UK, and I'm hoping to get back into it at some point. I really want to build another rally car and do it again. But I've actually got permanent damage to my shoulder, my left shoulder, due to a rally accident. I wasn't driving at the time. I'd just like to point that out. I was co-driving at the time, but basically traveling at about 70 or 80 miles an hour, we clipped a tree root and barreling through the air, rolled several times. And when we came to rest, it was against a tree trunk on my side of the car. So, and as I sat back down in my seat, I sat on a load of glass, and it caused some fairly nasty muscle and tendon damage to my shoulder. Apparently, my shoulder had popped out as well, so it was all dislocated. I'd lost 3.5 pints of blood at that point. The ambulance, as soon as it got to the crash site, they started a blood transfusion there and then.
What do you think happens to you at death or after death?
I don't believe there's an afterlife. Once you're dead, and that's it. You're gone. For that reason, I've actually got a bit of a joke going on with sort of family members and friends of mine, and there's been a massive increase in sort of funeral prices and things like that over here, especially if you want, sort of any kind of ceremony attached to it or anything like that. And I always joke. I sort of say to my friends, look, when I die, put me on eBay, see if anyone wants to buy my body, and if they don't, just throw me in the wheel bin. I really, there's no, once I'm dead, I'm dead. I won't be there. That's it,
I see a contradiction in the atheist who says we all have exactly the same outcome, annihilation, total annihilation, and yet we're supposed to be altruistic, make self-sacrifice, and do the right thing, even though it's a pain in the butt to do the right thing. Whereas in my worldview, there are lasting consequences. If you make bad choices, you better be careful because you could end up paying forever. Whereas if you strive to be good, then we can hope for an eternal fulfillment and happiness and pleasure and joy and life. So how do you defend your morality? Obviously you are a very moral person. Everyone I've met is. But how do you defend that, or what sort of basis do you have for morality, given the fact that you admit that everyone has exactly the same outcome? It doesn't matter. It literally does not matter what you do and what choices you make. How do you defend that?
Honestly, being nice to people makes me feel good. That's it. If I go around stealing things from people and committing murder and heinous crimes, then I'm going to prison. And I'd rather not spend time in prison, seeing as this is the only life I've got, But on top of that, I actually don't want to be nasty to people. I want to be nice to people. And I like it when other people are nice back to me. And going back to my ex, my Catholic ex, we didn't split on good terms. She treated me quite badly. And when she tried to get back in touch with me, I wasn't the nicest person to her, I'll be honest. And that's the main reason we haven't kept in touch, is because I just don't want to. I don't want to be nice to her. So for me, it's easier just to not be. But generally, whenever I'm talking to friends of mine or even strangers, I've been giving advice to strangers all day who are trying to drive in the snow. Giving them advice about, no, don't go down that road. Someone's stuck down there. The various information like that. And it comes down to, I hope, given the situation was turned the other way around, they would do the same for me. And that generally seems to be the way. I mean, I'm not. One of the reasons that I was raised sort of in this sort of atheist mindset is because actually most people around here probably are atheist in the south of England here. But I did definitely have some questions for you, and it's something that actually I did ask my ex as well, and that is, why are you Catholic?
I lost my faith at age 14, 25 years of atheism, which started out as sort of nice guy agnosticism and ended up being atheistic Satanism and hardcore anti-Catholic militant atheism, and finally hard solipsism. And having been reading and studying philosophy for like more than a decade, I entered into some this hard solipsism, and it was philosophy that brought me out of solipsism into monotheism. And once I was a monotheist, I could care less which of the three monotheistic religions was the true religion. I did not care. I just wanted to worship God. I wanted to worship my God publicly. I wanted to shout it from the rooftops that I'm in love with this God that created me out of nothing. And I didn't really care which religion was the true religion. And my anti-Catholic sentiment was still sort of there. I did not want to be Catholic. I did not want to be Christian even. I really wanted to be Jewish because I always loved the Jews, but I didn't think that I could be Jewish. So because there's that sort of that family ethnic lineage that you have to be part of, although some people do convert into Judaism, but it just didn't seem like the right thing to do. So I just by default thought that I was a Muslim. But it just so happens that I met a Catholic monk who was on his way to becoming a priest, and I asked him about God, and he agreed to give me instruction, and he took me to a mass, and I said, I want to join the Catholic Church. I don't know if it's true, I don't believe it's true, and I have all this anti-Catholic baggage, but I said, I want to join and find out. So I took the instructions for 6 months, one-on-one private tutoring, and I read a lot, really dove into it because I'm in love with God. And I came to believe and accept all the doctrines, all the teachings of the Catholic Church. And I already knew as an enemy of the Church that Christianity was, historically speaking, was Catholicism. It wasn't one of these later developments that branched away from Catholicism. I knew that historically the Church was Catholic because I'd read early Church stuff as an enemy of the Church. So that's basically the short story.
You've admitted there, though, that you don't actually care whether it's true or not.
Well, I do now. My attitude was, right now, I just have to express my love for this God. And later, I can do the intellectual work to figure out which of the three religions, the monotheistic religions, is the true one. Is it Judaism? Is it Christianity? Or is it Islam? And it turns out it's not that hard to figure out that it's Christianity. It really is not that hard, because it all comes down to the question, who is Jesus Christ? All three religions talk about who Jesus Christ is. Just look with a historical eye at each of the three stories. The Jews say, there's a Messiah coming, it's going to come at this time and at this place. And then Jesus Christ comes fulfilling all the prophecies, and the Jews say, no, it wasn't him. And then Judaism collapses. And then Islam says, oh, Jesus is a prophet. He was the second greatest prophet of all time. And the early church movement is a Muslim movement. It's a monotheistic movement, which is Unitarian, meaning it was not Trinitarian. It was a Unitarian movement. And Jesus was a good Muslim prophet, and all of the apostles were good Muslims, and it's not a Christian movement. Well, you just look at the historical record, and it's clear that that is not true. It's not the case. It's a Trinitarian church that is worshiping the body and blood of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, and it's a very, very Catholic, Christian, Trinitarian religion. So Judaism's gone, Islam's gone, I'm left with Christianity, and for me, Christianity is Catholic. So it is really, really not that hard to come to Catholicism once you're a monotheist, if you're willing to look at the data.
So you actually believe that Jesus Christ was an actual physical figure?
Yes.
Okay. And you believe that he turned, what was it, water into wine?
Yeah, all the miracles. What you need to understand psychologically about conversion, once you have a conversion, once you meet God, once you understand that you yourself are not God, that God is God, and you understand that relationship of the infinite to the finite, your relationship as a finite creature, your relationship to the infinite creator, once you've really tangibly encountered that in an existential and experiential way, then every other miracle just becomes very easy to swallow. There's nothing that's too wacky or weird to accept. I mean, I read the Old Testament, I read the New Testament, there's lots of weird stuff in there, okay? None of it is hard for me to believe. Now, my guiding principle is God is good. God is infinite in every perfection. Even though we abuse our free will and things go awry, God allows it because he can bring a higher good out of this mess that we create with our free will.
Well, that makes it seem like you do actually have free will.
For sure. No free will, no morality. And what's even more shocking, if there's no free will, there is no ability to reason. Reason itself has no meaning without free will. If reasoning is hard determined, 100% constrained, then it has no meaning. There is no justification to say that one configuration of matter, energy, and space-time is superior in any way whatsoever to any other configuration of matter, energy, and space-time. It's just completely absurd. We have to acknowledge free will. We have to acknowledge reason, that we can weigh our options and we can make a free decision. If we throw out God, we're throwing out free will, and we're throwing out reason, we're throwing out science, we're throwing out morality, we're throwing out everything that makes human life human.
I'm not sure I would agree with you on the reasoning side of things, but I certainly see where you're coming from when it comes to, if you go down the sort of the naturalist route, then you do start getting rid of things such as free will. And I do actually have some experience with this. I'm bipolar, type 1 bipolar, and if I'm not medicated, then I go from having months on end where I can't get out of bed and just want to die, to months on end where I am so high on life that I'm almost killing myself with all the stupid shit I'm doing. And that is the honest truth. That's exactly how I am when I'm not looking after myself, when I'm not keeping an eye on what I'm doing, and I'm not keeping an eye on what I'm taking, and making sure that I'm on a level. And those changes that take me from that teetering on the edge of falling off a cliff to wanting to leap off the edge of that cliff to being normal comes down to chemicals that I ingest purely to get me back to that position where I can act, for lack of a better word, like a normal human being. So, having been through that process, I sincerely doubt that free will is as free as people like to think. And I can even give an example of how that takes place. So I assume as you have a wife, you're not gay. Can you change yourself to be gay?
I think it's a choice. Yeah, I think it's a choice. I think you can dabble with all kinds of different perversions and acquire tastes, and you can get accustomed to that and then want something a little bit more racy. I've met people that have told me that they didn't start out gay. They just went from one thing to the other thing to the other thing, kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And then it was more than one person in the bed and so on and so forth. I'm a firm believer that we do make choices and those choices have consequences, and that we can end up somewhere really strange,
Okay, so do you prefer chocolate or banana?
It depends on the context, but if you're just offering me like a chocolate bar or a banana, I'll always go for the chocolate bar.
And do you think that you could change yourself so that you would always choose the banana rather than always choosing the chocolate?
Let's just say that there's a lot that's hard determined in us. There are many, 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 many constraints on us. And I think that a lot of us will be surprised when we discover just how limited our freedom was in many ways, that we took for granted that we were free, but turns out we were not free. But that doesn't negate my thesis that we have free will. My thesis that we have free will only requires that not everything we think, say, and do is hard determined. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense for you to impress me with how often we're constrained and how often things are determined. What you need to do is make a case that there's not even one area of life where we can have freedom. And that would be hard for you to do, I think.
I think it would be impossible for me to show that there is no possibility. However, I would be impressed if you could find one case where it wasn't, where you picked something you didn't want, but not because you didn't have to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. I can give you examples of that all the time. For example, in Canada, the Conference of Catholic Bishops decided some years ago that we no longer have to abstain from meat on Fridays. It used to be that you could not eat meat on Fridays. The Canadian Catholic bishops got together some years ago and said that is no longer an obligation in Canada, okay? But I freely decide to not eat meat on Fridays. So I don't have to not eat meat on Fridays. I voluntarily said, I want to do a little something for my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ since he suffered and died for me, so I could be happy forever. So I make a voluntary sacrifice. It's not easy. Sometimes I make an excuse, like last Friday, I said, well, I forgot to make myself a veggie lunch on Friday, so I'm just going to eat the meat. I'll just do some other sacrifice for Jesus, right? I had to weigh the option. I had to say, am I going to eat this meat sandwich that I made, or am I going to just skip lunch And I had to weigh the options, and I made a free choice. That was really free. What do you think is really happening in that moment?
You're weighing up whether you want to or whether you have to. And I don't know how you can see that as anything else. And you know, I do the same. I do the same myself all the time. Not I don't not eat meat on a Friday. I actually genuinely don't think about eating meat as being a big deal.
Neither did I until I imposed this rule on myself.
I've sort of grown up in the rural areas of Britain, and I lived in rural areas of Ireland and Germany, and so I've been around a lot of sort of pastoral farmers, and I hold my hand up. I have actually killed an animal for food. And I generally, you know, I hate to sound like a psychopath, but I had no problems with doing it. Absolutely no problems with doing it. And I think that's because I've always been raised to know that meat comes from animals, and that's raised me with a level of respect for those animals that states, right, well, actually, if I'm going to kill an animal, I'm going to make sure none of it gets wasted. But no, when it comes to making decisions, I'm constantly making decisions. And they ultimately come down to, do I have to do this or do I want to do this? And it comes up to a weighing up of the two of them. Sometimes it's something that sort of sits between the two. It's something that I sort of have to do, but I can do it in a different way that'll make it easier for me. So I want to do it in that way. Most of the time I do what I want rather than doing what I need to.
Yeah. I want to ask you, I've been playing with this thought experiment recently where you have what looks like a human being making decisions, okay? So it is indistinguishable in terms of its biochemistry and all that sort of thing. And it has all the sophistication, so it can be elegant and it can be charming and all that sort of thing. And it's doing some sort of task. Let's say it's doing a crossword puzzle or something like that, okay? And then beside it is a real human doing the same New York Times or whatever your London newspaper is, crossword puzzle. So what makes the human human, and what makes it better than or more than this really, really, really sophisticated artificial intelligence biochemical machine beside it? What makes the difference? Or is there a difference?
What makes the difference ultimately comes down to my level of empathy towards it. So if it's able to empathize with me and me empathize with it in such a way that we have a relationship in similar way that we would with other human beings, then it would become human to me. That's fundamentally where it stands. And I think we're going to see that in certainly the next 20 years, but possibly the next 10 years, we're going to see that happen. I mean, one of the annoying things about artificial intelligence is as soon as it becomes possible, it stops being called artificial intelligence. We have self-driving cars, which 10 years ago would have been called intelligent. These days, it's just self-driving cars. They're all over the place. They're not intelligent. And with each step, we see exactly the same thing. Every time it becomes possible, it's no longer AI. It's no longer important. And I think that's going to be the case until we get to this point where we can empathize with these intelligences. And I know you do get people. I mean, this is going to sound silly, but I somewhat empathize with my cars, and I have pet dogs, and I empathize with those. And actually, even when I was raising pigs, I still empathize with them, even though I ate them at the end of it. But it's a different level of empathy. And it's not until we get that level of empathy where we see them as another human being that they will then take on that mantle.
So there's nothing that makes the human human other than behavior. And if we can have a machine that emulates the behavior, then we have a human. That's what you would say.
Yes, yeah. I mean, if we created a super intelligent robot that behaved like a spider, we would have no problems with switching it off. Whereas if we produced a super intelligent machine that behaved like a human, that would be really difficult to turn off. Hell, even a super intelligent machine that acted like a dog would be very difficult to turn off for most people in the world.
I don't think we'd have a problem muting it. Oh.
I've never had a noisy dog, I'll be honest.
I was talking about the human.
Oh, yes, well.
At the end of my episodes, I do ask my guests just to give a little positive message of hope. So just to wrap up the show, what do you think you might be able to say to someone that's out there listening now?
Don't waste your time. Spend as much time as you possibly can doing things that make you happy and make other people happy. Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, you know, nobody on their deathbed says, "Oh, I wish I'd worked harder." You know, they always say, "Oh, I wish I'd gone and done the things that make me happy. I wish I'd gone swimming with dolphins. I wish I'd gone skydiving. I wish I'd done." You know, it's those sorts of things that people miss out on. And having had a few close runs with death, I appreciate being happy more now. So be happy.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you've got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.